the moderator here is my institute is partner in 2 of the Go4 projects, in progress and in grade. In progress, we were responsible for 2 work packages for innovation systems and for case studies. And in grade, we have empirically investigated the factors influencing the uptake of RRI in EU-funded research and innovation projects. And we have built an agent-based simulation model to assess RRI impacts. Of course, we were creating, working, and quarreling with indicators all the time. This is why I'm very happy and especially expectant to chair this session on RRI measuring the immeasurable, a critical approach between economy and responsibility, with 4 brilliantly chosen experts from the field, with Maria Schrammel, Erich Grießler, Spaapen, and Vincent Blok. Thank you for having agreed to share your findings and thoughts on this topic with us. Thank you also, audience, for being here in this very last material session of the conference. Let us follow the procedure which has been used during this conference, which means do not interrupt the speakers during their talk. If there are immediate, burning and short questions, we have some time right after the talk to address them. Otherwise, please keep your questions until the end. And there we will have ample time for discussing topics for all the speakers. Now let me introduce the first speaker to you. Dr. Spaapen is Senior Policy Advisor at the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. And among his many other activities, he, for example, coordinated the SIAMPI project, which is well known to most of you. So please, Jack.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk about a project that we started beginning of 2014, and the report was published in the first half of 2015. And this was a project on indicators, at least that was the plan. I'm not sure where I have to, yeah, okay, this works. This was in red, you see the title of the report, and you see here the people who were involved in this project. I think one of the collaborators, Gemma Revuelta, she was here yesterday, I don't see her now. The chair was Roger Strand. And we were asked to see if we could find either indicators or other means to monitor and promote RRI. And this was a very difficult question that we were asked because of many reasons. First of all, we noticed immediately that there was a lot of resistance in the research community. They were used to being evaluated on the basis of their so-called scientific quality. And over the last decade, they got used to being evaluated on the social impact of their work. But now being evaluated on research and responsible innovation, that was something that's sort of added to what they often see as a burden, an evaluation burden. Policymakers and politicians didn't seem, at least in a number of countries, so eager to have this on top of all kind of other evaluative exercises. And then yesterday we heard an account from a young researcher who was pushed by his PhD advisor to publish or perish. And I think for them it's also difficult to deal with RRI, and certainly in an evaluative sense. So this was very difficult for us to start, and on top of that, we got a briefing from the European Commission, from the Science with and for Society department, which made it even more difficult, our task. First of all, they asked us to include civil society in whatever we came up with for indicators, because they noticed that in a lot of RRI policy initiatives in that time, so it was the beginning of 2014, civil society wasn't really involved. And we should also pay attention to a very central topic in the European policy, sustainability. Furthermore, they told us that whatever we came up with for RRI indicators should compete with other policy agendas, like the economic growth, the scientific excellence, internationalization, simplification of bureaucracy. Well, if you add another layer of evaluation, that's not really simplifying bureaucracy. And we should also think of a number of trends in research and innovation, like big data, open innovation, etc. And the effects this has on stakeholders and citizens. So all in all, it was a very complex question that we got. So you have seen this definition of RRI many times these last 2 days. What I want to single out is the two words in red, mutually responsive, because for our little group, that was probably one of the core concepts of RRI, that whoever is involved in a project is responsive to each other, but also responsible for the evaluation of the project. So, of course, we got the 6 criteria, and there's been many remarks on these 6 criteria. I think it was René von Schoenberg yesterday who said that we shouldn't reduce RRI to these 6 criteria, and of course we agreed. We immediately added 2 criteria, sustainability and social justice inclusion, because they seemed very central in the European 2020 policy. And there's another good reason not to focus too much on these criteria. They might change over time, and it's also the case that there is in these different areas, there's a lot of research in most areas, which is good, of course, but there's not always consensus on what it exactly means. If we take ethics, for example, over the last few years, at least in the Netherlands, but probably in other countries too, research integrity has become a major part of the ethics discussion. What we got from the European Commission, from the SWAFS department, was a list of very quantitative indicators that they already envisaged being part of our exercise. And when we looked at these quantitative indicators, we came very quickly to the conclusion that this wouldn't do it. First of all, they look very concrete, but in practice they are not, of course. If we just look at the first one, the percentage of research and innovation networks that implement actions to promote RRI, well, one of the characteristics of a network is that it is changing all the time. Partners come in or go out. Ideas about the direction of development might change, etc. So that's not so easy. So we decided not to go for such a quantitative approach. Then when we look at the questions that Petra sent us before this session, we see, and this was also part of the discussion we had with the people from the SWAFS department, that there is a tension between, let's say, RRI indicators and economic goals, which seem to be rather prominent in any European policy. And as you see, 3 of the 4 questions are about the relationship between economic needs and responsible research and innovation. Of course, the question is then, what kind of economy are we talking about? Are we talking about the kind of economy that I read in an interview with Robert Jan Smits, who is the head of DG Research and Innovation, making research and innovation a central part of European economic policy, growth and jobs. Growth and jobs are really the two keywords in that approach of economy. But if we look at Mariana Mazzucato, a well-known economist from the UK, she is talking about a new social contract between governments and industry for fundamental green innovations. And then, probably the odd man out, there's a Catalan Robin Hood by the name of Enric Duran Giralt, who stole money from banks in a legal way. The banks were so eager to lend him money, like they are eager to lend money, have been at least, to many people who were probably not able to ever pay this back. And he spent that money to all kind of social and ethical and responsible goals. What I take from these different notions of what an economy should be is that sustainability is really a central concept. And in a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, that is also stated as an important way forward for the economy, sustainable entrepreneurship. And when we look at major policy initiatives around the world, these are the Sustainable Development Goals. Everybody probably knows the Millennium Goals. This is the successor of these Millennium Goals. In red, I put here the goals, the 17 in total, that I think come close to these 6 keys of responsible research and innovation. In green, a little bit of an ironic joke, I put the only one in the 17 that comes to the idea of jobs and growth economy, the focus on that. And the other ones are more neutral in this discussion. Of course, we had to look at the European policy context. The 3 keywords there are smart, sustainable and inclusive. I'm sure you have all heard of that. And when you read a number of the documents, you see that many of the programs in Horizon 2020 have these kind of goals, bringing different sectors of society together, bringing basic research as fast as possible to the market, with a focus on innovation, and the way they organize the programs, like the European Innovation Partnerships and the joint program initiatives, and of course the grand societal challenges, they all have a similar goal of building networks from policy, the scientific community and industry. Of course, these different sectors of society do not all have the same kind of goals. Here you see the examples of these large programs. The one on the bottom is a specific Dutch program, but I think it runs more or less parallel with the European initiatives. In the Netherlands, the Dutch context, they like to talk about the golden triangle between industry and science and policy. It is bringing all these different sectors together, but it is probably naive to think that within these sectors the ideas about societal needs, societal impact, responsible research and innovation, governance of these issues are similar. There are probably ways to build a common agenda and to bring the ideas more together, but it's not so easy. Although this morning, when we believe Lars, there are many ways these days to do that. These are the organizational characteristics of RRI, or transdisciplinary research endeavors. Of course, there's collaboration between these sectors, and there are concepts like the triple helix or the golden triangle, or a new production of knowledge was already introduced in the 1990s by Gibbons and a number of other authors, Helga Novotny being one of them. She later became very prominent in the European policy context. But what you get is, of course, that there is an input from very different fields of science, technical fields, social sciences and humanities, and from a variety of stakeholders who all have probably start at least with their own agenda. And then the mechanisms to reach consensus are, and I'm talking about 2 years ago, not so developed. Of course, there are methods that you can mention. PIPA is a well-known method. In Wageningen they have something called the mirror method. Yesterday in the Res Agora there was the co-construction method. So there are ways to deal with these differences, but it's not so easy. I think that whatever the project is, that it is often a learning by doing, how you deal with differences in the different partners of any project. And in the Netherlands we have had some experience in that top sector policy where we organized tables. I mean, really tables, sitting around the tables with these different people, and I witnessed some of these discussions, and I can say that some of them never succeeded, and some others were more successful. So it's not an easy thing. And here is a picture of another research that this comes from the CIAMPI research that Petra mentioned. What we did here was to look at a big Dutch nano research project, and we literally asked different participants in the network, starting on the left side of the picture with very fundamental research groups, via more commercial research group, to companies, to professional end users, and to consumers, what their relationship was in this network with other partners. And then you get a very interesting picture, because some of the relationships are just about having contact, discussions, etc. Some are much more concrete, go about product feedback, etc. And sometimes it's just about raising awareness. There's all kind of different relationships. If you want to do an evaluation in this network and you want to include the RRI keys, you can imagine that it is not a very simple exercise that you're doing. Yeah, I'm almost there. So our conclusion was that this is such a complex development, this RRI, that it doesn't make sense to come up with a list of indicators, a one-size-fits-all approach, but that we should give the evaluation back to the network. And this means that we basically asked the partners in RRI endeavors to discuss with each other, probably with people who understand something of indicators, what will work in their network. What are the kind of indicators that will help improve their collaboration and improve the goals that they want to achieve in the network. And for the sake of time, I will go to the last slide, because this is basically the scheme that we came up with. We looked at all these different keys, the 6 areas and the 2 that we added, and we started to collect data that we thought that could be used in these circumstances. And I think I'm not sure how many we found, but it was over 100 for all together. Now that of course is unmanageable if you want to use that in an evaluative context. What we did, we made 2 kind of indicators, performance indicators and perception indicators. The performance indicators are basically, you could say, action indicators. They tell us something about the process, and hopefully we can find something as outcome indicators, not necessarily the end outcome, so to say. It could be intermediate outcomes, but there we could imagine that there were some concrete indicators. The perception indicators tell us something about how people outside the network, but interested in the topic of the network, are involved somehow in what goes on in the network. So this is just to say that whatever RRI networks are doing is always happening in a context, and through this scheme we give the context also a place in the evaluation. And the things that you see here in the different cells are just examples, nothing more than that. The idea is that the partners in the network sit together and come up with a manageable evaluation scheme and manageable indicators, which can be very qualitative as far as we are concerned, to assess their work. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. That gave us an excellent start. If you don't have any immediate burning questions, I would like to move on to the second speaker immediately. Vincent Blok is assistant professor at the Management Studies Group and the Philosophy Group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And he takes us now to business contexts.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Philippe, and Robert is not here. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Vincent Blok. I'm working at the Wageningen University, and we have a group specialized in responsible innovation, but then in the business context, I want to discuss this topic with you today. Just as a starting point, and also after 2 days of this conference, responsible innovation is still a very positive, fancy concept, but it's also very open and flexible. There is, in my opinion, a lack of empirical research in this field, especially also quantitative research is missing. And there is still a bias towards science-driven innovation and not business, although I heard today, for instance, some interesting and positive storylines. Now, I assume that most of you will be familiar with our work in this field. We started with a more destructive perspective on responsible innovation in the private sector, because we thought this concept is politically motivated mainly, and it is not applicable or not completely applicable in the context of the business. For instance, the call for full transparency towards stakeholders is not applicable or not completely applicable in the business context because of reputation, competitiveness, and that sort of things. And for instance, the call for co-responsibility is also not possible in case of high investments by companies, for instance. So that was the first part of our type of research conceptually and also empirically. And now we wanted to move on to what more a constructive mode of research and to see to what extent, for instance, social entrepreneurship can help to understand or to better embed responsible innovation. Hi.
Sorry.
You're too late.
I know. Not for you though.
You're an Italian, of course. And on the other hand, how a concept like responsible innovation can benefit from practices in social entrepreneurship. But what turned out that also by the great work of Owen and Stilgo and all the others, there are lots of frameworks, but the dimensions of these concepts like responsible innovation, they are very blurred. So it is very difficult to do empirical research on such, let's say, vague or qualitative concepts like responsible innovation. So that was the starting point of our research. So the question is, on the one hand, to what extent can dimensions of responsible innovation be applied in the business context, but also how do we have to define then these dimensions, and how can we operationalize them for empirical research, and preferably what we like to do is quantitative research. So this was our our first idea, and we thought maybe a good research strategy is to broaden a bit the perspective on responsible innovation and broaden it toward, for instance, sustainable innovation and social innovation. Why? There is much more experience with social innovation and sustainable innovation in the business practice compared with responsibility, which is roughly unknown. And there is a lot of more experience with empirical research in these fields. So that was the intuition we had, and we thought, let's start our research with one of my PhDs to do a literature review on these three concepts: social innovation, sustainable innovation, and responsible innovation, and to see whether we can learn from these other concepts. Now, is it legitimized to compare responsible innovation with, for instance, social innovation? On the one hand, you have to say, okay, they are not the same, so they're different concepts. And for instance, in sustainable innovation, ethical issues are not that dominant, but there are also lots of scholars in the responsible innovation literature that claim that responsibility is also not an issue in responsible innovation. It's more or less a governance framework. So that is not a problem for us. And in case of sustainable innovation, for instance, it is in fact an innovation for society, like in responsible innovation, and it is an innovation with society. Public engagement is central in sustainable and in social innovation. So we thought, okay, it's not the same, but we can extend our concept here to learn at least from it in order to develop such a model for responsible innovation in the business context. So what did we do? We did a literature review on these three concepts. We limited ourselves to responsible innovation, sustainable innovation, and social innovation in the business context, and we limited ourselves to empirical studies, because that is then giving our input. We also limited ourselves to Europe and the United States, because that increases the reliability of our results, and we used both the academic literature but also the grey literature, because that is important in such an emerging field like responsible innovation. On the one hand, we expected, and that was in purpose, to define the intuitions, or to take the intuitions by Owen, Stilgo and others as a lead, and to define these dimensions based on the literature review. That is more a deductive approach. And we also scanned or reviewed the literature to find out whether there are other dimensions at stake. So first, the general results of this review is that on the one hand, but that was of course also expected, that the moral dilemmas or ethical issues were not that present in the literature which we reviewed, both not in the responsible innovation articles and not in the social and sustainable innovation literature. It was also clear that in the sustainable literature, innovation literature, it was more not about ethics but about epistemic problems. So I engage stakeholders to identify what is in fact the problem, what type of knowledge I need from other actors in order to develop the best innovation to meet or to address a societal issue. So these type of issues were much more present. And a general result then is that in general you can say that the dimensions by Owen can be redefined based on the literature view, but they are recognized at least, and that we have to add another a dimension which is then called the dynamic capability for knowledge management. Now I will discuss briefly the results, and to start with, and that is important for our future empirical research, because these dimensions are so blurred, we propose that anticipation concerns the object of innovation. So the product of innovation and the reflections, etc., on the product or the outcome of this innovation. So that's where anticipation is about, while reflection only concerns the subjective factors, so the internal factors, my reflections and that sort of things, while deliberation and inclusion concerns the process, and responsiveness concerns actual behavior. So responsive behavior, changed business operations, changed innovation processes. Now, if we look at anticipation, then also in the review of sustainable innovation, it can be relatively easily defined anticipation and recognized as determining outcomes of an innovation process, preventing negative impact, and finding pathways to the future that are better. And don't be shocked by the next slide, because I have only 50 minutes time. But this article is written and submitted, so I give you an impression of what you can expect in the article. In the you cannot read it, but in the first column we have this definition, these 3 key activities of the dimension. Then the activities or indicators that show this type of behavior. And in the third column you then see the practices that are described in an empirical way of how these activities are put in practice. So, and if you are interested, just send me an email and I will show, or I will send you the whole article with all these dimensions I will discuss, so that I can limit myself a little bit to the definitions and the issues which are changed or which are different between responsible innovation and the business context of application. So reflexiveness, as I said, it concerns the subject of innovation, so the internal reflections. And it's also interesting to see that in sustainable innovation and social innovation, actors are reflecting upon their actions and responsibilities, values and motivation, that sort of things. So in this respect, it is, you can recognize what is also said in the responsible innovation literature. The difference is that this is done in a private way. So in the responsible innovation literature, you see that there's public engagement, all type of actors have to be involved in all phases of the innovation process, while in sustainable innovation and social innovation, that is not at stake because of competitiveness and reputation. People do reflect on values, motivation, that sort of things, as is claimed in these articles, but they share not all the information with others. Then, sorry, this was reflexiveness. Then inclusion. Wait a moment. Owen and Stilgo and others use these words interchangeably, and also for empirical reasons, research reasons, we think that we have to distinguish both concepts, and that we also have to limit the applicability of these concepts. So the involvement of stakeholders, so no public engagement at large, not phrases like as many stakeholders or actors as possible. No, in sustainable innovation, for instance, you engage stakeholders in order to develop a quality network that can address the issue at hand. And of course, that is the motivating or the driver for commitment and stakeholder engagement. It's not primarily about ethics in these type of innovations, also not in the empirical research on responsible innovation, to be honest, but it's about these knowledge or epistemic problems actors experience. Deliberation then can be seen as the prerequisite of this engagement of stakeholders. So there is a dialogue, but it's not an open dialogue with all kinds of transparency, which is expected more from a political, democratic perspective on responsible innovation. From a business perspective, this is a limited openness, because there is competitiveness, there is secrecy, there is all kinds of incentives not to share all information with others. And also this deliberation is more about epistemic problems. What is interesting, what was for me personally one of the interesting things, is that I was heavily opposed to the idea that responsible innovation was about co-responsibility. I think this is ridiculous in the business context, to be honest. But what is interesting is that now, if you look at sustainable innovation, that there are empirical examples of sustainable innovation in which actors were involved in decision-making processes. So the radical position of co-responsibility is, in my opinion, still impossible, while influence on the decision-making processes, there are empirical findings that can support this idea. Responsiveness, also interesting. If you look at Owen and Stilgo and other frameworks, it is about an institutional framework of responsiveness, while if you look at it from a business perspective, sustainable innovation, it is more about changed business operations, changed innovation processes in order to become responsive. So that's interesting also for empirical research, because we can look at actual behavior instead of all kinds of intentions and that sort of things. Now, as I said, sustainable innovation and social innovation is more about epistemic problems than ethical problems, and it's in this respect not surprising that an indicator or dimension like dynamic capability for knowledge management is found in the sustainable innovation literature. So it's about knowledge creation and knowledge development, and in this respect stakeholders are engaged also in this innovation process. I'm running out of time, I guess. So my conclusion, what we tried to do is to prepare a next step, which is, in my opinion, necessary in responsible innovation research, that we have to leave the idealistic and political motivations behind us, and that we have to look at empirical practices that can instruct us of how responsible innovation could be put in practice. And in order to do this, you need to define dimensions of responsible innovation that are also measurable. And there are all kinds of problems with measurement, but on the other hand, we cannot stick with the idea that it is a holistic concept and that everybody has to put it in his own practice and everything is contextualized. We also have to do research as researchers on this topic. And what we now proposed is to define these 6 dimensions of responsible innovation that hold or may hold in the business context. And our next steps will be to apply this on a database of an international database of social entrepreneurs with rich data about lots of cases, in order to see to what extent these kind of dimensions are at stake in practice. The conceptual problem still, and I hope that I can inspire you, also the people against measurements. The ethical issue, or the conceptual issue is that what is the role of ethics? Everybody's talking about ethics and everybody's talking about a normative framework, but that is something really which is still a gap for me in the literature on responsible innovation. And to give you, and then I finish, one example, Bernard, that is for me really surprising. For instance, there is a lot of literature in the field of business ethics. But an exchange between responsible innovation and the normative frameworks of responsible innovation and business ethics, that is, you wrote one article that is starting with it, but that's it. So I'm also interested in this more ethical issue of such a framework. So if you have tips, just email me, Vincent Blok, Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Bye.
Thank you. That was very useful, Vincent, especially in suggesting knowledge management dimensions and implementing RRI in businesses. If there are no immediate reactions to Vincent, we can move on to Erich. The next speaker, Erich Grießler. Erich works at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Vienna in Austria, and he will talk about how private firms make use of RRI.
And how do I move the slides? Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. And when I got this invitation, I was kind of shocked because I should contribute something to measuring the immeasurable. And I thought, what should I contribute to that? And then I thought, okay, I'm part of this Resagora project, and maybe I can present some empirical results of the research we did in the Resagora project, which might help us a little bit to start measuring the immeasurable. So within the Resagora project, we had a small sub-project somehow, which was called RRI Trends, and the task of this project was, or this sub-project was somehow to map and to monitor what's going on about responsible research and innovation in Europe. And we were thinking, okay, we cannot do the whole of Europe, but we can do a few countries. And so we selected on the basis of the MESIS data, which Niels Milgaard put together years ago. We selected 16 countries and appointed 16 national correspondents and asked them to tell us what is going on in your country about responsible research and innovation. And the interesting thing is, and these are the colleagues who were involved in that, and I give you not my email address, but I will give you a website where you can find all the data and all the information about this RRI Trends project. So, and when we made our first meeting, our kickoff meeting, it became quite transparent that, and this is something we have been discussing 3 years, and also in this conference at length, is that this concept of responsible research and innovation is kind of ambiguous and understood in very different ways. And so we also found out at this workshop that in these 16 countries, there are quite different understandings of responsible research and innovation. And therefore, we started off with, okay, find out in your country, what do you understand in your country about responsible research and innovation? What are the values which are covered by this term of responsible research and innovation? What kind of instruments do exist in different institutions to foster, to promote these values in research and innovation? And so what we found out in this first round of our monitoring was that the understanding of what responsibility and to whom one is responsible differs in many countries. So in some countries it only meant economic growth, but in other countries it also meant to meet societal needs, or to have a pristine nature, or to have something like a nuclear-free environment, no nuclear plants anywhere, or a GMO-free environment. So there is a great diversity of meaning of responsible research and innovation, or whom or to what we are responsible to. And it was also very interesting to see that there is also a great diversity in what kind of technological areas you are in. So this showed there is a diversity between the countries if you look at the general policy level. Okay, but we also were interested in what's going on in companies. So we asked each of the national correspondents to select 2 research-intensive private companies and to look in the way how they use responsible research and innovation. How do they use this concept? And we had a very small sample of private firms which were in the area of biomedicine, chemistry, machinery, ICT, consumer electronics, construction, and energy. And we did qualitative research on that. We did interviews, and we looked at material which was on the website or which was given us by the people we interviewed in the firms. And so what were the main outcomes of this research? So RRI, as my previous speaker said, RRI is little known in companies. It simply isn't used. So only those companies which participate in framework program or in Horizon 2020, they know about the term because they read the work programs, they read the calls. But all the others, they didn't know about this concept. However, many companies address the topics that are covered by RRI by other concepts such as CSR, community development, diversity management, gender equality, and sustainability. So there is something out there which is somehow related to RRI or overlapping with RRI, but it's understood in a different way and used in a different way. And I think this is also, we had this also today and yesterday, this discussion about, is industry aware of RRI? Do they know about it? Do they do enough, or do they nothing at all? So this shows also in this little empirical research we have done within RRI Trends. But there is also great variation between companies. So companies vary significantly with regard to whether and how they use the concepts covered by RRI. So there is variation what a particular issue of RRI means to companies, the emphasis they put on it, how important they consider it, how long they have been dealing with the particular topic, and the instruments they are using to promote a certain issue of RRI. So if I go through these keys of the Commission, then I can see, okay, only a few companies raise this question of public engagement, and the meaning of public engagement is quite different in different companies. Most of them, you could say, it's about education. It's about telling and informing people of what the companies are doing. But only a few of them, and a very small minority of them, means by public engagement also involving consumers into the innovation process. So this is hardly done in the sample we got together. When you look at the gender aspect, it's very clear that this is the one which is most frequently, it's well known and it's most frequently done if you compare it to others. But again, it's used as, it's as interpreted as equal representation of men and women at all levels. So it means job opportunities, but it doesn't mean to involve the gender aspect in the innovation process. So this is something we didn't get along in our sample. When you look at science education is understood as a way to safeguard future young academics and engineers. So working together with universities so that you can recruit the future staff you will need. So in this way, there's a cooperation with university and schools, public lectures, but there is little science education in terms of that you inform the public or that you go to the public and tell them about your work. Open access, and I think one of the speakers before me already mentioned that some, it's not very often raised, the topic of open access within industry, and it's also very ambiguous because those who are close to academic research, they say, okay, our researchers can publish in open access journals, but when they prefer to publish in journals with a high impact factor, that's okay with us. So that's up to them. So there is no really promotion of open access in this way. They are not impeded to do that, but there's also no incentive to do it. And on the other hand, open access contradicts with secrecy and confidentiality of research results and on innovation. So there is this ambiguity and this contradiction in open access. Ethics, again, is only frequently mentioned, and it does have a different meaning in companies than in academia, whereas in academia it's about research integrity. In the business sector, it's much more about compliance and anti-corruption. So when you talk about integrity, that's meant what by ethics. And also what is also important when you talk about ethics in the health sector, it has quite a different meaning than in other sectors. So in the health sector, it's well defined. It's about patient rights and so on, and human rights. But in other sectors, that's not so clear. Sustainability, which is not officially part of the keys, is something firms very easily can connect with. So we found that sustainability is an issue which you find very often, and there are also indicators developed for that, and there are also targets. So this is something which you can really find in the business sector. Okay, how am I with time? Okay. So I think I will come to the conclusions to have more time for developing that. So when we talked to people in the business sector during the interviews, but also during the Resagora project in the stakeholder workshop, there are two contradicting elements or two contradicting aspects. On the one hand, there seems to be in the business sector the need for a clear definition where you can also have indicators and measurements. Something you can relate to, you can rely on, and also what you can somehow tick box. But on the other hand, when you have a very general definition of RRI, it's not very sensitive to the actual situation. So you have to break it down to the actual situation of the firm, of the business. So there is this kind of contradiction between we want to have a general definition which should work for the whole planet, and on the other hand, it should be specific to the specific situation. So there is this conflicting needs of a universal definition and the local specification. Then what you also have to consider is that although there is this general idea of RRI, very often this idea is not found very often in the business sector. So you have to connect it somehow to experiences and instruments which are already existing in industry, businesses, and SMEs. And also you also have to be aware, I think, that and this was already said as well, is that CSR is not responsible research and innovation because it lacks the innovation and research and innovation context. So you have to emphasize that this is about research and innovation. So, and I'm coming to my final slide is if you're interested in the empirical results of our research, you can find that on this website where you can download all the information. And in another presentation, I showed you how to do it. I hope you find your way to the Resagora website and you find information which is useful for you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Erich. That was very interesting. On this conference, there have been ambivalent statements about whether we have or have not enough awareness and involvement of industry, and you gave another account of that based on empirical research. So thanks for that. Are there any immediate reactions, comments, questions for Erich? No, then we move to the last speaker. That's Maria. Maria Schrammel is a researcher at the Center for Social Innovation, and besides the RRI Tool project, she is involved in citizen science and public engagement issues.
So first of all, I want to thank you to have the possibility to present the self-reflection tool here. It's a tool developed in the framework of the RRI Tools project, and I will talk before presenting the state-of-the-art at the moment of the self-reflection tool a little bit about why self-reflection and not self-assessment. So self-assessment versus self-reflection. At the beginning of the project, we had the idea like to develop a RRI self-assessment tool, but we figured out like pretty soon actually that it's not that easy to do an online tool assessing RI because it would be a tick boxing system, and we decided it's like, especially for an online tool, it's more important to support reflection instead of doing benchmarking. And there is also risks of providing quantitative measuring, in our opinion, especially for such a tool. Such a tool could be misused as like getting the RI stamp. So like tick boxing all the answers and then like, yeah, it's RRI, so actually a process, a reflection process or anticipation process, and also like responsiveness and all these process requirements for RRI would be kind of stopped then. So RRI is a process rather than achieving a certain standard, so it's actually never finished. And a self-reflection tool has the potential like to stimulate deeper reflection, which pre-knowledge on RRI you have or you don't have. So the main aspects of the self-reflection tool is it helps to get deeper insight into the concept of RRI. This is very important for people who maybe already or just start getting in contact with the concept of RRI. It animates for deeper reflection on RRI. And it addresses different stakeholder groups. I will show you on the wireframes then how this works, because we try to follow a bottom-up approach, like giving the possibility to choose questions which are most relevant for the users. And there are also different levels of pre-knowledge in RRI addressed. And what's also very important about the self-reflection tool is it stimulates dialogue, because reflection should not happen just by your own. It needs the dialogue with others. And at the end, there will also be suggested resources according to the answers you gave when doing this self-reflection tool. So I will go through from the user perspective now. So there will be a starting page. The text is just a draft that will be changed, to say that in front. There you can either start right away, or you can get a guideline. The text is also being developed. There will be two options, like to register on the RRI Tools platform. That's the same registration as for the toolkit of RRI Tools, or to start the tool without registration. And but there will be like advantages if you register, such as like saving your answers and monitoring what you answered. If you do it again, like half a year in between, something like that. That will be the starting page, visualizing the concept developed in the RRI Tools project. So you see in the middle the key dimensions or policy agendas, and around there are the 4 clusters of process requirements. So this should visualize that it's about the process, but still we had the idea like to enter the questions of the self-reflection tool through the key dimensions, because especially for users of the tool who just get in contact with the concept of RRI, it might be easier to enter through the key dimensions than through the process requirements, but there will still be the option to reflect on the process requirements as well, so that questions will be split up in these process requirements. Then what's also important is already here the user has the possibility to choose with which question block he or she wants to start with. So we are not telling them like you always start with ethics and then you keep on going with public engagement and so on, so that the user chooses which one might be the most interesting or the most important one at the beginning. After choosing one of the question blocks, there's going to be the question page showing you on top which question block you are already answering. You will have a list of questions. It's about 7 questions per question block with different answer options. Mainly it's quality answer options. And then there is an open field as well, which should like invite you to individually reflect on this question, because the answers, they give you like some ideas about the question, but the open field should also like enable you like to reflect on your personal field or your personal topics or your personal team. And there should be chosen at least 2 questions per question blocks. And keep on going like that. You can always submit in between. You don't have to answer all question block, but the tool is also making you aware of like thinking about all different policy agendas or key dimensions and also process requirements, even so you don't think it might be very important for you in your research field. And so you can keep on going, you can save in between and continue later, or you just finalize. And when you're finished, like you can submit and always save for later, and you will get like a summary of recommendations, or better, let's say, suggestions according to the question blocks. And there will be like tools or inspiring practices which are interesting for you, the user, because the question's gonna be tagged in the background. So these suggestions, I would not say they are not there. They will probably not be really tailored to the answers, but it will be topics which are interested to you according to the questions you answered. And the user will also get a personal self-reflection sheet, like collecting all the answers he or she has chosen, also like the open question fields, summarizing everything, and also that's actually to get in dialogue with your team members or peers or other people interested and to reflect together with others, which is a very important part about this process. And there will also be a second tool in the toolkit then where people can get in contact through forum, and there they can also share like their experiences in the self-reflection, through the self-reflection process. So that was very fast and short presentation, but I wanted to keep space for questions. And
thank you, you did. Thank you. So your talk not only stimulated reflection on RRI, but will most certainly stimulate our discussion now. Let us start with a general discussion and open up to the audience to address all the speakers. So, yes. Please introduce yourself and then have your thing.
Yes, my name is Carsten Seidel. I'm working for the University of Bremen in Germany and for a Spanish consultancy company on European projects. And I find all your presentations very interesting because we have been working since a couple of time based on a European Baltic Sea region project on developing a tool for self-assessment on innovation capability. And we have developed a set of 160 processes which are now being put with another support project into a digital format, and we're trying to concentrate all these processes. And at the same time, we're applying for an ISO number because we've had quite a good acceptance with the tool, with the self-assessment, as Mrs. Schrammel said. These tools stimulate a lot of debate and internal reflection, and we would like to, with you and with others, to continue an exchange and possibly ideas on how to further develop that, because we feel ourselves that even though we've conducted a number, I think 48 assessments up to now, that we're still in the very early stages of it. And we're doing a pilot study to apply this. In Bremen, we're constructing, or the Senate is constructing, a center for advanced materials dealing with additive layer manufacturing, that is like 3D metal printing, together with the aerospace industry and with a number of small and medium-sized companies. And we could do with some, well, not support, but with some reflection group or exchange for developing or for further developing this tool to our application concrete there in this new advanced materials setting. So, as I said, I find it very interesting what you're doing, and we'd be interested to continue that possibly with other projects. Thank you for your attention.
Anybody wants to react on that?
Maybe it may be a way to
you have to press.
It is maybe interesting to take your comment as a starting point for a discussion. What is the importance of logos, tick boxes, and ISO type of classification schemes for the enhancement of responsible innovation, for instance, in the business context? And I would say, for the sake of argument at least, but I believe also in it, that logos, tick boxes, etc. are of course not the solution of all our problems, but they can really help to enhance, for instance, responsible innovation. And I give you one example in the Netherlands, and that's throughout Europe. I guess you have the Choices Foundation for Healthy Food. And they have a stamp or a stoplight type of system in the Netherlands. You have a sign that a food product is relatively healthy compared with other comparable products like mayonnaise or ketchup or whatever. And you see that that this logo is helping to set the innovation agenda of companies. And in this respect, I already would say that classification schemes and tick boxes, and most of the people are very negative about tick boxes, but I'm very positive about tick boxes. So maybe this is a good starting point for discussion, also in alignment what you said.
Yes, that was Bernard next.
Robert is laughing. Yeah, okay. No, I have not to be the devil advocate because Vincent has already done this. So the first question is for Vincent. When you say that co-responsibility is ridiculous, I wanted to know, for example, in the industry, responsibility understood as accountability is not ridiculous, I think, in industry. A very short question for the first speaker. You make an equivalence between keys and criterions. For me, keys are aspects of RRI. For example, you have the 5 pillars. They are only thematic things. And the indicators are something else, but perhaps you can correct me. And an important question for both of you. When you've said, it was for Erich and for Vincent. Vincent, you said, okay, we have quite no empirical research in industry. And if I follow well Erich and what I've listened from Agora, most of their work were empirical work. So perhaps the problem is not that you have 2 ways to do empirical work. One way is to do only a description of what's happened. What have you in mind when you speak about responsibility? What you've done, what you've presented, Erich. And another way is to move from only descriptivist approach to a more institutional design one. You are not interested only to study things like pygmies. You want to do a social experiment and you assess the social experiment. And for example, to give you an example, on deliberative democracy, you have empirical people working in political sciences, like Jörg Steiner, for example. They have decided to propose a quality index of deliberation in Parliament. I've spoken about that yesterday. How have they proceeded? They didn't went into a Parliament and say, what do you think it's deliberation? They have read philosophy, political theory, they have a theory, they have the indicator, and they assess the thing. I'm finished.
Yeah, about keys and criteria and indicators, I think I wasn't maybe precise enough. The keys, that was the word was used by the SWAF's department, and so they call these 6 keys. That's their vocabulary. Furthermore, we like to, in our group, we called those 6 things criteria. Those were the criteria along which you can say something about development of RRI in different projects. Indicators is, that's more difficult. What you often see when you discuss these kind of things is that people talk about indicators, but what they mean is indicator categories, because developing indicators is a rather difficult thing to do, and you have to be very precise, and you have to know a lot about how you can construct good data sets. And so I think I wasn't precise enough, but we are very much aware of the differences between the 3.
Saved by the bell. Bernard, yeah, co-responsibility. Of course, you're right, but you have to, that responsibility can be taken as accountability. But if you look at it from the perspective of the discourse on responsible innovation, it's about a political, economic type of ideal behind it, that we have to democratize the whole society, including research and innovation. Now, I did some empirical research also on cases like Unilever and Friesland Campina, that type of companies, and their stakeholders. And you have to imagine that if you really have to invest large amounts of money in a new product that you do not want to share, so co-responsibility, share responsibility with stakeholders, but also the stakeholders, and I'm talking about non-economic stakeholders like environmental groups, they don't want to share responsibility for the product this company is investing in. So in this respect, I would say that co-responsibility is ridiculous. I'm sorry for the word, but that it is not feasible, and that you can imagine why it's not feasible. Then with regard to your second question, I'm very happy with it because you're completely right. And for me, it is important, and that's also, I think, the importance of the work of my colleague and also our empirical research we did already. First, you have to look at de facto responsible innovation. To what extent is this whole concept applicable? Where are the barriers for companies, for instance, regarding transparency, IP, all that kind of things? Before, I would say, we can start to design an experiment and to do something with an institutional experiment or a design, like you said. But I received new grant last month from NWO, the Dutch Research Council, and we start to do research on start-up companies in agriculture, technology providers. And in this case, we thought, okay, it doesn't make sense anymore to do this type of research on de facto responsible innovation. We have to do an experiment indeed. We have to engage them, or some of them at least, in an experiment in which they have to reflect or have to be willing, of course, to reflect on ethics and future impacts and that sort of things. And then we can also measure, after a year, for instance, whether this really had impact on their innovation, on their own internal business processes, etc. So I fully agree with you, but I think that in an emerging field of research, you have to make stepping stones. So first, more cases, and now we move up to more advanced types of research methods.
So that's your turn.
Thank you. Joachim von Heimburg, Innovation Management Consulting. From a practitioner point of view, I want to come back to Vincent's remark on assessment and Maria's contrasting of assessment versus reflection. When you think about industry wanting to share in this whole process, which I think many in industry want a lot more maybe than some of you imagine, I think you have to think about the practicability and the relevance of what you are doing. I mean, we have to call some things out, which is industry is not there for being responsible in innovation. Industry is there for innovating to make money. Now, it's a fact, because we are part of the society, that you have to behave responsibly because you want to have people working in industry who are happy, who want to contribute to innovation, and you want to have markets and society which will buy this not only today but tomorrow. So there is clearly a need for dealing with the responsibility of research and innovation, and that's all very well accepted. However, it is, when you reflect, you can only reflect about things which are primary to you. And what these responsibility elements are, they are boundary conditions, they are frameworks in which you have to operate in order to be a good citizen, and industry is willing to do that. But you have to help industry to define what a good citizen is. Industry cannot define that by itself. Industry can define what does it take to make more money, what does it take to achieve certain things, but not what it means to be a good citizen. Let me give you an example. When you have to decide to invest into nuclear research as an industry, you are a good citizen in some states and then not a good citizen in other states. Industry cannot decide that for themselves. They have to get guidance from the society. Think about the iPhone. If you look at responsible innovation, and look at, I think you, Jack, talked about some factors of responsible innovation. The iPhone had no public engagement, there was no social inclusion, there was no education, and open access is a joke. We are all happily buying it. So we can't say it's the bad industry and the good society. We have to kind of make these two elements meet, and that's what I would call, and I think, Vincent, you call out, we have to be practical on these things. will help both the society and industry, because at the end of the day, the industry pays a lot of what we are doing here.
I think I more or less agree with you, but I'm not sure that we are all happily buying the iPhone. And one of the reasons is that if you see it as a technological innovation, then maybe yes. But if you look at all the social consequences of this iPhone, which is making contact 30,000 times a day with all kind of other organizations and institutions and giving your information to these, there is a lot of questions there that are, for instance, related to ethics or other discussions. And the other thing is that I wanted to say is that I think I sort of follow what Vincent is saying, and maybe I agree with him to a large extent. But I think it also depends on which phase of the innovation process you are. We talked to a lot of people from business, smaller businesses, also big business like Philips. And it was interesting to hear, for instance, from one of the Philips representatives, that they weren't so afraid, especially in the beginning of an innovation process. If you remember the picture that I showed from nanotechnology, it is about a period of 10 to 15 years. So the more fundamental part, people from Philips told us we are not so afraid, we're not so worried about secrecy and everything, not only because we are at the beginning and we see people coming in to this topic and maybe after a year going out and other people coming in, it's so different, it can be very different in 1 or 2 years time. And also it takes much more than just stealing some idea and then coming to a product. It takes a long time, a lot of effort and a lot of different elements before you can copy something like that. So there are differences depending on the phase of the innovation process that you're in.
Anybody else on that, like Erich and Maria? No? Okay, then.
Maybe one quick remark. You said responsibility as a boundary condition, and that is on the one hand right. But what I would like to stress that for companies, responsible innovation can also be a business opportunity. So it's not it is not only a boundary condition of your innovation practices, but it's also a business opportunity. I think that is the main advantage why also if we really want to advance our society in a responsible innovation, responsible way, we really need the companies on board because they can take advantage of these opportunities.
Okay, then it's your turn.
Thank you, moderator. I must congratulate all the 4 presentations were excellent. Vincent, in your presentation, you talked about social, sustainable, and responsible, the broad 3 categories. And I found Jack's classification and his addition to his standard list of 6, sustainability, social justice, and inclusion. And I was wondering how you propose to capture this idea of inclusion and in what way indicators, as you said, are to be worked out, and in what way you think it's possible to capture the idea of inclusion, particularly the list that you had in terms of SDGs, and you said goal 8 brings in that kind of contribution to GDP and economic growth.
If you ask me the question about this particular topic, I think it's a nice example to show that because we see that all these 6 to 8 criteria are contextual, it depends very much on the context that you're working on. So I can imagine that if you are working on, let's say, a new what do you call it? An inenting? What is it? Shot. A vaccination. That's the word I was looking for. I have an example from the Netherlands. If you there was a new vaccination against cervical cancer, And this was organized by a very well-known Dutch agency, and they were always very successful with their vaccination programs. 80–90% of the population would agree with the way they organized this and would accept this. In this case, it meant that this cervical cancer vaccination had to be done to young girls, 13 or 14 years old. What they completely started this process from a medical point of view. They didn't include the parents, they didn't include the young girls, they didn't talk about issues of relationship between parents and young girls, the way they talk about their sexuality, etc., etc. And the campaign was a complete failure. I think only 40% of the population accepted this vaccination program. And later, the doctors that we talked to, they admitted that they didn't include the right people for this vaccination campaign. Now, this is a relatively small issue. I can imagine if you have a much larger program with a much larger impact in society, you need to include other stakeholders, so to say. So the basic thing is if you, and then if you talk in terms of criteria and indicators, in this case, it have to be a more qualitative approach where you look at who is going to be involved in the process at what time, and you draw your conclusions from there. It doesn't make sense to start counting number of stakeholders or anything like that. So, but it depends very much on the context, and that's why we say let the participants in a process decide what is a good way of involving the most relevant groups in society.
We have two more people on the list. First is Robert Jenny.
Yeah, I wanted to ask all of the speakers a kind of provocative question, and with perhaps a short message coming from you, stating that we're talking about responsible innovation. So we are from the economic perspective, we are from, let's say, we are looking at the industrial company perspective. I would like to ask you all, what is, according to you, the reason for doing responsible research and innovation? Is it a moral, an ethical reason, or is it a functional one? Because if it's a moral, or let's call it ethical reason, how can you quantify it? If it's a functional one, how can you give account of the qualitative side? So it's a provocative question that you can also answer at the end, perhaps, because it might take time off from the other question, but to give us a message, in a way, on this relation between a quantitative approach and a qualitative approach. Can they interact? In which way, without losing too much one of the other sides? Because we need to assess examples of RRI. How can we do that? Thank you. But the moderator can decide if to leave it the answers for after the other question, as you wish.
Just self-organize.
Short answer, both. I mean, it depends. It depends on what aspect are you looking at. For instance, if you look at medical research, you cannot you cannot not comply to these standards, which are you have to apply and to have to comply with in medical research. If you look at CSR, sometimes it's functional, because when I talk to a oil company, they say we want to give back to the communities where we do the mining. It's both. It's ethical, but it's also functional, because they have to somehow legitimate their work there. So you cannot say it's either or. It's both, and it's really specific to the aspect you're looking at. Gender. It's both. Short answer.
Next one.
So I agree to that it's both, and I also think that there is like aspects in RRI which need to be measurable, even so it's a moral, ethical but especially for industry and business, but also like especially numbers and kind of numbers as indicators can help to make plans to go in a better direction. So example, I don't know, like gender equality, we see if the numbers change of women and men like being in positions, for example, but it's not something these numbers, in my opinion, can't say, so now it's enough and now it's fine. It just needs to help and support you in going in a further direction.
2 minutes for the two other speakers.
Oh, that's easy. I completely agree with the previous speakers. So the issue, people who are in favor of conceptual and qualitative research, they are always a bit afraid about figures and calculations. A calculation is an indicator that we are in the good direction, for instance. Just what you said. For instance, if you look at gender issues, for instance, it gives you an indication, are we on track or not? It cannot replace the concept itself. But we do not have to be afraid of indicators that can measure at least whether we are on the right track. And then, of course, if we are on the right track, we can discuss in a qualitative way how we can proceed further, for instance, or how we can invent new ways.
I don't disagree with the previous speakers, but I think it's something else. I think it's historical. Just after the Second World War, we had that famous paper of Vannevar Bush, and that led to the idea that if we give money to scientists or researchers, they would do the best things with it. And then in the 1970s and 80s, after economic crisis, we started to talk about accountability, and we wanted to have all kind of measurements to see what these researchers were doing. And then by the end of the previous century and beginning of this century, the societal impact came in. And now a lot of these issues that are discussed in responsible research and innovation have to do with the fact that we are indeed seeing that research is in a different position now. It's becoming less and less independent, I think, and it has to participate in all these larger projects. And I think that, and what also added to this is that there were issues about gender, there were issues about integrity of research, there were issues about science education. This all added, we have had a long discussion in the new construction of the Dutch National Protocol for Evaluation, where all these issues were discussed. So I think it's just an historical development that has to do with the changing position of science research in society.
So very last question.
It's very brief. I'm Anita Borch from Consumption Research Norway. Thank you all, very interesting. This is a question for Maria. I find those kind of tools very interesting, but at the same time I wonder about the use, because it's so easy to make standards, it's so easy to make these kind of tools, but are they used, and what do you do eventually to have people using them?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. We thought a lot about that, especially for online tool and also like getting in contact. We tested some questions already and they worked well, like to start discussion, but actually face to face. So we will see if it online works. But yeah, we will try to disseminate it and like get people like spreading it and starting using it. And actually it's like people who will use the self-reflection tool will definitely already be interested in an RRI approach and are kind of looking for, you know, a way to enter and to start this process. So the target group will not be people who are not interested at all in RRI. They will not use it. And I think it will be hard to get them to use it.
Yeah, thank you very much. For me, the takeaway message was that we need a design approach to mediate between economic needs and responsible approaches. It's not bad industry and good society. We see complex patterns. We need to understand and start to work with them and maybe experiment with them before we understand them correctly. Thank you, Maria, and Vincent is already gone, Jack and Erich, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you all for your valuable contributions and good ideas. Thank you.
you.